I'm Ava. The shattering sound of glass still rings in my ears, and the image of broken plates and spilled food is seared into my memory. It was supposed to be the most beautiful birthday dinner for my boyfriend's mother, Elise. I'd spent 2 days in the kitchen, pouring my heart and soul into every dish, hoping to win her over. But instead, it turned into a nightmare. Elise stood up at the head of the table, her face contorted with anger. "This garbage isn't fit for a dog," she shrieked, her voice echoing through the room filled with 20 guests. And then, with a swift motion, she flipped the tablecloth, sending everything crashing to the floor. I was in shock, unable to believe what was happening. And then, to my utter disbelief, my boyfriend, Leo, started clapping and laughing. It was as if he found the whole thing amusing. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I slowly bent down and picked up a piece of the birthday cake that had landed near my foot. It was a cake I'd made from scratch, knowing Elise preferred homemade. I walked up to her, looked her straight in the eye, and pressed the cake into her face, saying quietly, "Happy birthday, Elise." That's when the real chaos began. But this story didn't start with that disastrous dinner. It all began 3 years ago in a cozy coffee shop. I was sitting alone, sipping my coffee, when Leo walked in. He had a messy haircut but the warmest smile I'd ever seen. He sat down across from me and casually pointed out a crumb on my chin. There was no embarrassment or cruelty in his tone, just a simple fact. I liked him instantly. When he asked for my number, I wrote it on a napkin, even though my phone was right there. It felt like something out of a movie, and I was 28, full of dreams and a bit naive. We dated for 8 months before I met his mother. Leo told me Elise was sensitive and had been through a lot. Her husband had left her when Leo was 12, and she'd never fully recovered. He said he needed to make sure I was serious about our relationship before introducing us because once we met, there was no going back. I thought it was sweet, a sign that he was protective of me. The first time Elise came to my apartment, Leo gave me 3 days' notice. I spent those days cleaning, decorating, and planning a delicious meal. I made a savory beef stew, fresh bread, and a chocolate mousse for dessert. The apartment smelled amazing, and I was nervous but excited. Elise arrived 45 minutes late without calling. She was dressed in a purple coat and carried a small gift bag. When she handed it to me, she said, "Just a little something for the hostess." Inside was a cheap scented candle still in its plastic wrapper. Over dinner, Elise asked me a lot of questions. She wanted to know where I worked, if I owned my apartment, and how much I'd paid for it. I could see the interest in her eyes when I told her I owned it. She ate the stew and complimented the bread, but there was always a hint of something behind her words. I kept telling myself she was just being curious, that things would get better. Leo and I moved in together 14 months after we started dating. We moved into my apartment because it was bigger and in a better location, and I'd put a lot of effort into making it a home. Leo was an easy-going guy. He preferred to avoid conflict and was happy when things were already decided. But this trait became a problem when it came to his mother. Elise would call multiple times a day, and Leo would always answer. She'd show up unannounced on Sundays, and Leo would let her in without a second thought. She'd make comments about the way I ran the household, like how I didn't make the bed every morning. Leo would just look at the wall and say nothing. Elise's birthday was coming up, and Leo suggested we throw a big party. I agreed, still hoping to build a good relationship with her. I spent 2 weeks planning the menu, taking note of all the things she liked. She loved roast chicken, glazed carrots, and lemon pie. I worked tirelessly, making sure every dish was perfect. On the day of the party, I started cooking at 8 a.m. Leo offered to help, and I gave him a list of tasks: go to the wine store, pick up extra chairs, and buy flowers. He left with a smile, saying he'd make me proud. The guests started arriving between 6 and 6:30. Leo's aunt, Grace, and her husband, Tom, were warm and friendly. There were also some of Elise's friends from her book club. Everyone seemed to enjoy the food and the atmosphere. Elise arrived last, as usual, in a red dress that I'd never seen before. She looked around the apartment with an appraising eye, and then gave me that same measured smile. I served the food in stages, and everything was going well. People were enjoying the meal, asking for recipes, and having a great time. But then, when I brought out the lemon pie, everything changed. Elise looked at the pie, and her face hardened. "This is not what I like," she said loudly. "The chicken is dry, the carrots are overcooked, and this pie is a disappointment." The room fell silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Leo just sat there, looking uncomfortable. And then, Elise stood up and flipped the table. That's when Leo started laughing, and it was like a knife in my heart. After the incident, I cleaned up the mess while Elise and Leo were in the living room. When they came into the kitchen, I asked Leo why he had laughed. He said he was just surprised. I told him that what Elise had done was unacceptable and that he needed to tell her it wouldn't happen again. But he just said she'd been through a lot. A few days later, I found a document in Leo's drawer. It was a property assessment for my apartment, and the name at the top was Elise. I was shocked. It was dated around the time Leo had first mentioned the birthday party. I realized that they had been planning something, trying to find a way to get my apartment. I called my father, a retired accountant named Henry. He's the most level-headed person I know. He listened to everything and then advised me to call a property lawyer. He said not to tell Leo I'd found the document yet. I found a lawyer named Mia Thompson. She was recommended by a family friend. I told her everything: the party, the assessment, and my suspicions. She said that while the assessment itself wasn't illegal, it suggested intent. She pulled the property records and found that there was a market analysis on my apartment done by a real estate agency a few weeks ago. It became clear that Leo and Elise had been working together to build a case against me. They were waiting for our 2-year cohabitation anniversary to claim a common law partnership and try to get a share of my apartment. I spent the next few days acting normal, but inside, I was planning my next move. I found a letter in Leo's desk that confirmed my suspicions. It was from Leo to Elise, saying that the dinner was a way to create an incident that would help their case. I met with Mia again, and she prepared a preemptive filing to establish my sole ownership of the apartment. I decided that I couldn't stay with Leo. He had betrayed me, and I couldn't trust him anymore. On a cold Saturday morning, my father came over. Leo was at the gym as usual. When he came back and saw my father at the kitchen table, he knew something was up. I showed him the evidence, and he tried to make excuses, but it was too late. I ended things with Leo. It was a painful decision, but I knew it was the right one. I was no longer going to let them take advantage of me. I've learned a hard lesson, but I'm stronger now, and I'm ready to move on with my life.